December 7th, 1941. In the span of 2 hours, the pride of the United States Navy was reduced to burning scrap metal. The battleship sat on the bottom of Pearl Harbor. The Pacific Ocean belonged to the Empire of Japan. Admiral Yamamoto famously feared he had awakened a sleeping giant. He was right. What happened next was the greatest industrial miracle in human history. In just 4 years, the United States didn't just rebuild its Navy, it built a fleet larger than all other navies in the world. Combined, we went from a crippled force of old dreadnoughts to a horizon-filling armada of fast battleships, steel-decked aircraft carriers, and swarms of destroyers. This is not just a list of ships. This is the story of the Iron Giants, the silent killers, and the floating cities that strangled the Axis powers into submission. This is every major U.S. warship class of World War II. We begin with the survivors, the Old Guard, the Pennsylvania class, including the USS Arizona and the USS Pennsylvania. These were the super dreadnoughts of the First World War. At Pearl Harbor, they were the primary targets. The Arizona was lost, but the Pennsylvania rose from the ashes. Though too slow for the fast carrier task forces, these ships found a new purpose. They became floating artillery batteries, raining hell on the beaches of Okinawa and Surigao Strait. The Nevada class. The USS Nevada was the only battleship to get underway during the attack on Pearl Harbor. Beached, broken, but not beaten. She was refitted and sent to Europe to shell the beaches of Normandy on D-Day, proving that the old dogs still had bite. The New York and Texas class, older still. These ships carried massive 14-inch guns. The USS Texas is a legend. During D-Day, she flooded her own torpedo blisters just to tilt the ship, giving her guns enough elevation to hit targets further inland. That is the kind of grit that defined this generation. But the war needed speed. Enter the North Carolina class, the North Carolina, and the Washington. These were the first of the fast battleships, designed to keep up with aircraft carriers. They carried 9 16-inch guns and enough anti-aircraft weapons to blot out the sun. They were the turning point. The South Dakota class, known as the Sodaks. These ships were shorter, more compact, but just as deadly. The USS South Dakota, known to the public only as Battleship X for security reasons, single-handedly shot down 26 Japanese planes in one battle. They were the brawlers of the fleet. And finally, the kings of the ocean, the Iowa class, the Missouri, the Iowa, the New Jersey, and the Wisconsin. These were the ultimate battleships, the largest, the fastest, and the most powerful ships the U.S. Navy ever built. They could steam at 33 knots. They carried 9 massive 16-inch guns that could fire a shell over 20 miles with pinpoint accuracy. It was on the deck of the USS Missouri that Japan finally surrendered, ending the war. But the era of the battleship was ending. The war in the Pacific would be won by a new queen, the aircraft carrier, the Lexington class, the Lady Lex, and the Saratoga. These were originally designed as battle cruisers but converted into carriers. They were huge, and they held the line when the U.S. Navy had almost nothing left in early 1942. The Yorktown class, the Yorktown, the Hornet, and the most decorated ship in naval history, the USS Enterprise, the Big E, the Gray Ghost. At the Battle of Midway, it was the Yorktown class that broke the back of the Japanese Navy. They were tough. The Yorktown was bombed, torpedoed, and abandoned. Yet she refused to sink for hours. The Enterprise fought in almost every major battle of the Pacific and survived them all. But one ship wasn't enough. We needed a swarm, the Essex Class. If the Enterprise was the hero, The Essex was the Army. 24 of these fleet carriers were built. They were the backbone of the fast carrier task force. They carried up to 100 aircraft each. When the Japanese looked at the horizon in 1944, they didn't see one ship. They saw a wall of Essex Class carriers. Unstoppable, the Independence Class. We needed carriers so badly, we converted cruiser hulls into flat tops. These were light carriers, fast, agile, and perfect for hit-and-run tactics alongside the big boys. And the unsung heroes, the Casablanca and Bogue Class, the Jeep carriers, small, slow, and thin-skinned. But there were dozens of them. Their job was unglamorous but vital. They hunted German U-boats in the Atlantic, and they provided air support for Marines on the beaches of the Pacific. Protecting these high-value targets were the workhorses, the cruisers, the New Orleans class. These were heavy cruisers. Treaties limited their weight but not their fighting spirit. They bore the brunt of the brutal night battles in Guadalcanal. At the Battle of Tassafaronga, the New Orleans lost her entire bow to a torpedo and still sailed back to port in reverse. The Baltimore class, the definitive heavy cruiser of the war, freed from treaty limits. These ships were massive, packed with 8-inch guns. They were designed for one purpose: to pummel enemy surface ships into submission. The Cleveland class, the most numerous cruiser class of the war. 52 were planned. Light cruisers armed with rapid-fire 6-inch guns. They were the machine gunners of the sea, chewing up aircraft and light ships with terrifying speed. The Atlanta class. These were unique. Anti-aircraft cruisers, covered in turrets and guns. Their job was to create a wall of flak around the carriers, a shield of steel against the kamikaze attacks. The Alaska class. The large cruisers. Bigger than a cruiser, smaller than a battleship. They were beautiful ships, designed to hunt down enemy cruisers. Though they arrived late in the war, they were symbols of American industrial excess. We built them, simply because we could. Below the heavy steel lived the tin can sailors, the destroyers, the Benson and Gleaves class, the pre-war destroyers. They fought the Battle of the Atlantic, escorting convoys through wolf packs of German submarines, fighting a cold, miserable war against an invisible enemy. The Fletcher Class, the legend. If you picture a World War II destroyer, you are picturing a Fletcher. 175 were built. They were fast, heavily armed with 5-inch guns and torpedoes, and they were everywhere, from the freezing Arctic to the burning tropics. It was a Fletcher-class destroyer, the Johnston, that charged the entire Japanese battleship fleet at the Battle of Samar, proving that courage matters more than tonnage. The Allen M. Sumner and Gearing class, the late war upgrades. They took the Fletcher design and added more guns, more torpedoes, and more range. These ships served well into the Cold War. The destroyer escorts, the DES, smaller, slower, but built in the hundreds. Their job was simple: protect the cargo ships. They were the sheepdogs of the sea. While the surface fleet battled for control, the silent service strangled Japan. The Gato and Balao class submarines. These boats did not get the glory, but they did the damage. They sank over 50% of all Japanese shipping during the war. They cut the empire's supply lines, leaving factories without metal and planes without fuel. They were the most effective weapon system of the entire war. And finally, the ships that delivered the final blow, the amphibious force, the LST landing ship, tank. The sailors called them large, slow targets. But without them, there is no D-Day. There is no Iwo Jima. The LCVP, the Higgins boat, the small wooden craft that carried the infantry to the sand. General Eisenhower said that without this boat, we could not have won the war. In 1941, the U.S. Navy was broken. By 1945, it was larger than all the other navies in the world combined. It wasn't just the steel, it wasn't just the guns, it was the logistics, the industry, and the sailors who manned them. From the PT boats dodging shell fire to the mighty Missouri and Tokyo Bay. This fleet didn't just win a war, it changed the world forever. This was the Iron Armada,